So there were about $10,000 a year being spent on translational research into idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. Zero NIH funding had ever gone towards studying IMCD. There was no research infrastructure in place. Zero large clinicopathological studies to describe the disease had been done. As a result, there was no diagnostic criteria because no one had ever systematically characterized the disease. There were no cell lines, animal models, registries, or biobanks that existed. There were no predictive biomarkers of whether someone was likely to respond or not respond to given drugs. There were no treatment guidelines. The disease was very poorly understood. There were no FDA-approved therapies, and there were no drugs in development beyond this one drug targeting interleukin-6. It was frightening to understand this. But I was thankful that there was this drug being developed that targeted interleukin-6. Though the drug did not work for me, it does help about 1/3 of Castleman disease patients. And it's thanks to this gentleman, Kazu Yoshizaki, photographed here, who identified interleukin-6 as an important driver in Castleman disease. And actually, I heard from a colleague that Kazu had tested a drug that targets interleukin-6 receptor on himself. And I said, Kazu, I heard you tried tocilizumab on yourself as the first human to prove that it was safe. He said, no, I didn't try it on myself. The nurse, she gave it to me. I said, exactly, Kazu. So Kazu tried that drug. It ended up going on to get FDA approval in the United States for rheumatoid arthritis, but was initially developed for Castleman disease. So kind of understanding where we were as a field, not in a good place, I wanted to look to see how is rare disease research pushed forward for other diseases. And so I looked at how research is done and what I call the kind of traditional approach. So typically in rare diseases, patients and loved ones raise money, and then foundations announce requests for proposals and invite researchers to apply to use the funding how they would see fit. Then a few expert researchers will select the best applicants from those who apply, a few researchers will apply, and then a panel will select the best applicants, and then the research gets performed. And so basically, you hope that the right researcher applies for the right project at the right time, and then you hope that that research is then translated. We decided to come up with a different approach, what we call the collaborative network approach, where we wanted to start by first expanding the community of physicians and researchers, and also including patients as part of that community, using the entire community to identify and prioritize what research should be done. Not what research do you want to do in your lab, but what research needs to be done, and then going out and looking at other fields to figure out who is the right person to do our study right now, raising the funding to make the studies happen, sharing the data back to our community so that way the community can continue to crowdsource the right research ideas, utilizing those same data to see what drugs are already FDA approved for one thing that might actually be able to be repurposed for this other disease, and then when drugs are used off-label, making sure to assess their effectiveness in the real-world setting and also through clinical trials, with the ultimate goal of getting towards personalized medicine, the right drug for the right patient at the right time. This is this new approach, what we call the collaborative network approach, which we spearheaded first for Castleman disease. And as a result, we've been able to establish a really large research pipeline. So I'm not going to go through these studies individually, but before we started in 2012, I mentioned there was about $10,000 spent per year in translational research. None of these studies were in process, but today, in 2019, we have approximately 18 studies that are at various stages. We've been able to make a lot of progress thanks to this really systematic and proactive approach to science.